What's up, everybody? In today's video, we're going to be reviewing the book Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It by Kamal Ravikant. Now, I heard about this book because I think it's being re-released again, and so it's just been in the news and been in some of the podcasts that I listened to, and I never heard of it before, so I wanted to read it because it's a self-help book. The title sounds pretty cool, so why not check it out? And the book is pretty cool. It's in a weird format though. It's like a blog post or an email chain. And I think that's initially what it was. That's what Kamal talks about. That initially is just something that he wrote down and he shared it among friends, and it made its way around Silicon Valley, and it just became popular. And people, his friends, and one of his friends is James Altucher, who I talk about a lot on here, who told him that he needs to write this, and that's what he eventually ended up doing. But it's definitely in a weird format. It's a little bit confusing sometimes. That's a thing that I'll say about it, is like it's not really like in a clear linear path. It's not a typical self-help book with clear chapters. It's a little bit all over the place. But with that, let's just get into it. So it's split into three parts. Part 1 is the vow, part 2 is the manual, and part 3 is the lesson. So part one just goes straight into his vow. And what he means by like vow is a promise to himself that he made, and he was just tired with life. He was suicidal. He had just gone through a breakup, and he just he's just like, I had it. What can I do to turn my life around? And what he ended up doing is writing a vow to himself about how he loves himself. And that's basically what this book's about. The title is Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It, and that's what it's about. It's about loving yourself and basically repeating that over and over again. But he takes it a little bit further, and he immediately goes into the practice that he developed. And his practice is the mental loop, which is number 1. Number 2 is the meditation. Number 3 is the mirror. And number 4 is the question. And just a little bit more background too. He's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and he also had a business that went bad. But that's how he's popular. He's an entrepreneur. He started several businesses. His brother's also a popular entrepreneur and is into cryptocurrencies. So that's how he has a little bit of notoriety outside of this book. So like we'll just go right into each one of these steps. And the mental loop is just repeating you love yourself over and over in your head. And to me, this makes a lot of sense because the way I've been using it since I've read this book is just anytime I think of negative thoughts, just replace it with I love myself instead. Because that way you just don't dive deeper into those negative thoughts. And that's what he talks a lot about in this book, is that we are our thoughts. So why not change your thoughts so you could have a better life, have better thoughts and a better life. And then step number 2 is the meditation. Now the meditation, he does recommend listening to music, because that's what he does, and he listens to 7 minutes of music to have a 7-minute meditation. And during the same time, he just repeats I love myself to himself. But he also recommends imagining a light beam pouring into your head, because he's like, with light cleanses everything and makes everything more pure. But it's basically the same thing as repeating love yourself, but just doing more in meditative format. And then step 3 is the mirror. And the mirror, what he recommends doing here is like going into your bathroom or any mirror that you have and just looking in the mirror for 5 minutes and saying, I love myself, like looking yourself in the eyes and doing it very intensely, just so that you just like believe it more intensely than just thinking it out loud with your eyes closed or something like that. To me, that one seems like a weirder one, but I mean, he says it helped him, so maybe it'll work. And I think that's another thing, a lesson I learned from this book too, is like maybe come up with your own routine. Because I don't know if adopting somebody else's routine, doing this stuff, will work for everybody. But he says it worked for him, it's worked for other people. A lot of people said this stuff worked for them, so maybe give it a try. And then lastly, the question, number 4, is you have to ask yourself, if I love myself truly and deeply, would I do this thing, like whatever that is? So if you're going to eat something bad, then you have to ask yourself before that, and if you really truly love yourself, would you eat poorly? No, you wouldn't, because you don't want to sabotage yourself. Or like any decision, any bad decision, like entering a bad relationship, making a bad decision, whatever it might be. He gives an example later on in this book about he had an opportunity to go on a guy's trip where there's going to be a lot of drinking and just doing bad stuff. And he asked himself this question. He ended up not going on the trip. Even though it was with friends, he just decided not to go on the trip. But after he goes through these 4 steps, he has a really cool story, which he references throughout the rest of the book, about a schizophrenic man. And he tells a story of Richard Bandler, who's one of the founders of NLP, and he uses hypnosis a lot, who used to cure schizophrenics by doing different things. And he cured this one guy who was schizophrenic. He would see snakes everywhere. And so he ended up going into a psychiatric hospital, and Richard Bandler went to cure him. And he went to a guy who had a bunch of plastic fake snakes. And he's like, can I rent your barrel of fake snakes? And the guy's like, no, I don't rent the barrel. You have to buy them. And he's like, no, I'm curing schizophrenia. Like, let me rent the barrel. And the guy's like, all right, whatever. He's like, I also have some real snakes if you want me to help. He's like, yeah, that'd be perfect. And so they went to the hospital, and he put all these fake snakes and the real snakes in this guy's room. And then he brought the guy in, and the guy was panicking and wanted to be let out of the room. And he's like, I'm not gonna let you out of this room until you can spot the real snakes, the fake snakes, and the ones that you see yourself. And then the guy perfectly did it. And then he's like, how were you able to do that? And he's like, well, the ones that I see that are fake are like, they're see-through. I can see through them. And what he says, I just thought that was a cool story, because it's just like mental power that we have. Sometimes sometimes our options are like clear and right in front of us. We just don't use them. But Kamal says that it's like you don't always have to fight your fears. You just like have to turn on the light. And that's what he talked about, like meditating with the light coming down into your head. Just turn the light on in your life, and it'll like completely change your life. And another practice that he recommends in this book is like, in this section, writing things that you need to forgive yourself onto a piece of paper and crumpling it up and like tossing it off a cliff. And I've read this in other books too. A lot of people say this, like, you know, writing down things that you need to just get rid of in your life, and write it on a piece of paper and crumple it up and toss it away. So this is good advice that I've seen in other self-help books as well. And another thing he says in this section that's really good is like, he says a lot of us get caught in the obsession with wanting to end our lives, like thinking suicidal thoughts, and it becomes an addiction. And that's what he faced when he was going through tough times. He says there's a groove there, and you have to replace that groove with something more positive. And the way you do this is by repeating, I love myself. But I think that's true as well, right? I think it's really easy to get down on yourself and then think suicidal thoughts. So that was something that I thought was really good and that I identified with. And he also used that groove metaphor throughout the book. Like, you have this groove that you have in your brain, and you just have to replace it with a new groove. And after this, he goes into how to write your vow. So that's basically part one. Part two is the manual. It's basically how to put all this stuff into action in your life, like all the steps that you need to do. Even though I thought the first part was how to do that, but this is actually like more of a manual, even though I'm not sure it's really different than part one. But he gives a little bit more advice in this section. And he says like he had 2 questions left after he sent out emails that had this love myself stuff in it. And those questions were, how can I apply this to my entire life? And 2, how do I make it last? And he says like, you could always make changes in your life, but you have to jump. At some point you have to jump. You can't just sit there waiting for something to happen. And in this case, he wants you to jump into loving yourself. And he says the way you do this is you dig a foundation and you dive into practice. And the way you dive into practice is through those 4 things he said, which is the mental loop, the meditation, the mirror, and the question. And then lastly, build on the foundations. And this is just applying this to every section of your life, the past, present, and the future. And then that's really how you're going to make it last. And he says the vow, when you write the vow to love yourself, there's no turning back. Like, the only option after that is to love yourself. And then he actually gives instructions on how to write the vow. So step 1 is basically just write it on a piece of paper. Step 2 is make the statement powerful. It doesn't have to be long either, he says. And step 3 is rewrite it if you have to. Like, if you don't like what you initially wrote, change it and adapt it. Step 4 is read it out loud until it vibrates inside of you. And what that means is just like consistently repeat it to yourself. Step 5 is put it somewhere daily where you're going to remember to read it. And step 6 is read it twice daily, and he recommends reading it in the morning when you wake up and at night before you go to bed. And then he also provides another thing outside of the meditation and all this stuff, is like the 10 deep breath practice, where you take 10 deep breaths, and when you're taking your deep breath in, you say, I love myself. And then later on, he says you can level this up by saying thank you on the way out. So basically you're thanking yourself for saying that. So that's just another thing that he gives after providing instructions on the vow. And he says another way to like really make this stick in your life is to get a calendar and put an X through each day that you accomplish all 4 parts of the practice. He also recommends creating rituals. What this means is you have to put it into practice in times in your life where it makes sense. For example, getting ready in the morning, brushing your teeth, saying I love myself, driving in your car. And like for me, what I said earlier about if I'm thinking a negative thought, I like automatically switch to saying I love myself to just snap yourself out of that situation and the negative thinking. That's basically all of part 2. And then part 3 is definitely the weirdest part of this book. There's like all Roman numerals and stuff. Basically, I think it's just his journal from sometimes that he was journaling about loving himself. I think the journal is actually after he stopped saying I love myself and all the practice, and then his life started getting bad, and then he started picking up the practice again. And like I said, this is just basically his journal. So if you just want to read about his life, like that's what it's good for. But there's not a ton of stuff in this part there wasn't in the other 2 parts. But there are a couple things that I'll go over right now. Like he talks about The Rock in this section, which I identified with, because he talks about looking at The Rock's social media and how, The Rock in social media is like always working out. He's always doing stuff. He's always filming a movie and then moving on to the next movie. And he's like, man, this guy's just excellent. And he gives The Rock's background too, like how The Rock was down to no money and then he just made a vow that he's going to turn his life around and became one of the most popular entertainers. And he said The Rock was, when he went to movies from wrestling, that his first movies weren't that successful, but he told himself like, I'm going to be a successful actor. And then now he's like the highest paid actor there is. And so he used that as motivation. Like, I'm going to be excellent in my thoughts. And again, this is where he says that we are our thoughts, so why not improve your thoughts? And he did this in physical activity too. Like when he went to the gym, he thought of The Rock. And anytime he thought of slacking off, he's like, I'm just going to be excellent in my thoughts. And he recommends that for everybody else. And the love myself practice is part of that. It's just improving the positivity in your thoughts and shining a light on your thoughts. And he also talked about one of his friends who's an Olympic lifter. And then this guy was at the gym and he had some weird pink shoes. And he saw some kids who couldn't lift. And he went over to them. He's like, let me show you how to do this. And they're all laughing at him. But then, and there was like a ton of weight and they couldn't lift it. And they're all like trying to figure out how to lift it, or each one of them was trying to lift it. And this guy showed me he easily cleaned it up. And he said there's 2 lessons from that. Lesson 1 is never judge a guy by his shoes. And lesson number 2 is be excellent. So this is just reiterating on the point before, like with The Rock. Just be excellent in your thoughts. And I think about this a lot in my life, especially with self-help. Like, we're always trying to find life hacks or tips or small habits that we can do to improve our lives and be excellent. But a lot of the times it is the little things, but it's like doing the little things constantly. Like we always think there's a limitation. Like I can only be this good, and then I can slack off all these other times, or I have to be like other people. I have to watch a lot of TV. I have to consume this type of media. I have to eat this type of food. I have to drink alcohol. I have to do bad things. But we don't. You can be excellent all the time. And there's obviously don't take it to an addiction bad level, but you can be good to yourself all the time. You can go to the gym and work out. You don't have to work out heavy. You can do walking. You can do lifting on certain days. You can be excellent in your life and really make tons of changes, because it's over time, those small little changes in your life can change everything. And I think loving yourself and saying that to yourself is going to change you deeply. And I definitely believe this is true, especially this is to me is a form of self-hypnosis. And I just reviewed that book, Through the Open Door, and I recommend combining those two, using this book, Love Yourself, but when you're making your vow, use some of the words that we went over in Through the Open Door of now, because, and don't, and really trick your mind into being positive. But also anytime you're negative, you can essentially hypnotize yourself by just repeating, I love myself. And then that'll bring your positivity up. And it's really going to open doors, like Kamal, Ravikant says in this book. So this book I think is pretty good. The overall advice is good. I think it could have been a lot shorter. It didn't need to have 200 plus pages of him stating the same things over and over again and stating the same stories. A lot of this book is about his relationship with this girlfriend who dumped him. But I think the advice is really good. The repeating the love yourself, I definitely agree with. So I recommend checking this book out if you're trying to get positive and trying to be excellent in your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a like if you like the content, and make sure to subscribe to get my other book recommendations and self-help tips. Thanks for watching.